Yo, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast that digs into the world of comic books. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is a great one. It's a return visitor as Sanford Greene, the one-time artist of Power Man and Iron Fist at Marvel, joins to discuss his upcoming Image Comics series, Bitter Root. But before we get into this week's chat, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And hey, make sure to rate and review Off Panel as well. It helps the show in the magical world of algorithms and the internets. And if you're a super fan of the show, you can back it on Patreon as well at patreon.com/offpanel. In exchange for your support, you'll get early access to each week's show, exclusive access to written and audio content, and more. And now, let's get to this week's episode. Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the artist of the upcoming Image Comics series, Bitter Root. It's Sanford Greene. Thanks for coming on, Sanford.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk about a lot of things. Bitter Root, which we're going to get to. I love. It's fantastic. We're going to talk about some NBA way at the end. But I want to start with something that I thought was really interesting. I want to talk a little bit about your background and your general perspective on art. And one of the things that I was reading an interview with you where you said that one of the biggest influences on you when you were younger was cartoons. And like in terms of wanting you to, turning you on to art. What was it about cartoons? Like what cartoons were you watching when you were younger that got you turned towards art?
Oh, well, truth be told, it was cartoons. It was a combination of cartoons and comic strips. This is right before I discovered the incredible medium known as comic books, and that was kind of a combo of the two. But the cartoons that stood out to me at that time were the Super Friends. That's kind of like that is the holy grail of all of the cartoons of that era. And honestly, it was a combination of some of the, I guess, knockoffs or the parodies. I don't know if there were parodies of the Super Friends, like, Blue Falcon, Dynomutt, Space Ghost, of course. Those characters were very similar. Of course, they were all under the Hanna-Barbera umbrella. So those cartoons were the ones that really made me take notice of what was out there at that time. And shortly after that, went to the local, I think it was Kmart. I don't know if you guys even have those up there. I think they're all extinct now. I don't know if it's completely closed, but at the time, Kmart was the place to go. I went there and I saw the incredible spinner rack that was displayed out front of the store, and I was hooked. It was I levitated over to it. And I noticed the comics had similar characters that I saw on those cartoons, and that's what really got me hooked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read that Secret Wars and Crisis on Infinite Earths were two big ones for you when you were younger, right?
Oh yeah, as far as comics, yeah, that because I think I had an interview just the other day, and I just realized that I didn't have the question that was asked to me about what comics did you collect as a kid, and when I really started to think back on that, I realized I collect all kinds of weird stuff or just random because it was all fresh and new to me. I didn't understand the monthly collecting aspect of it just yet. Also, I was just fascinated by seeing a bunch of superheroes on these covers, like the X-Men or the Justice League or the Fantastic Four. When I saw multiple characters on the covers, I realized that may mean they're inside this comic as well. So that's honestly what I went for. It was a bunch of characters, a bunch of comics that had a lot of characters. The Avengers probably was my most collected. Again, it was random collecting, but that those characters, you saw Thor and you saw the Hulk and Captain America and Iron Man and so on and so forth, and that's where the Secret Wars and Crisis became my first full collecting, because then it was like, wait a minute, not only am I getting the Avengers in this one title, Secret Wars, I'm also getting the Fantastic Four, and I'm also getting X-Men and so on and so forth. So that made my collecting, it started to make sense that, oh, in order to get a continuous story, or to get these characters continuously together, I need to tune in for the next issue.
Mm-hmm.
So that's honestly where a lot of my sensibilities were at that time.
Yeah. I feel like that was, I mean, I started collecting probably in the late 80s or early 90s. And it's funny, if you look through my collection back then, there was a lot of X-Men stuff, but there was also a lot of super random stuff. Like, I would just come across copies of ROM Space Knight, and I would get those because I like the idea of a robot, and I didn't know
Yeah,
anything about it. And so I just have a bunch of random ROM Space Knight, or like, I don't know, Shatter Force, or like all these other random books. And it's funny though, because I think back then we didn't really have, I mean, obviously you didn't have the internet or anything like that, but you were just kind of figuring things out, and you're figuring out what you knew you liked comic books, but you just got these random ones just as you're figuring things out for yourself, and you kind of ended up with what you liked, which apparently for
right.
you is Crisis and Secret Wars. But I am with you on the team book thing. One of the first comics that made me realize I loved comics was a West Coast Avengers annual that had the Avengers and the West Coast Avengers having to fight because the Grandmaster brought them together. And they also played,
Oh, right.
yeah, they also played baseball in the issue, which was huge for me. And so, anyways, but I don't know. I mean, I think it's funny how those things, like your young brain starts piecing all this together and figuring out how comics work.
Right. It's funny. You say that, and still at that age, it was such a mythical medium, because you're looking at, like, for instance, Crisis.
Right.
George Perez, his illustrations in that book, still to this day, are some of the most amazing collections of storytelling that's ever been produced.
Mm-hmm.
Just the panel to panel, I can't even, I still can't wrap my mind around the amount of work that was put into every page.
Mm-hmm.
Um, every once in a while, I will open that volume of work and kind of thumb through, just to get some ideas on sequential storytelling, just how to do something that's a little more unique, or something that has a little more art driven aspect, but still keeping the foundational aspect of good storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a funny story. I used to think that at that age, that the illustrations were done the actual print size of the comics,
Oh, right.
and it drove me nuts looking at something like Crisis and seeing all that crazy detail, and realizing that, oh my God, this right here is there's no way.
How did
I
he get
will
his pencil to
never,
do that?
yeah, I just felt so defeated. I was like, I will never be able to master this comic book thing. So I might as well go and continue to play football or something. So I was, I was totally spent on that whole um, thought of comics being done that size.
Mm-hmm. You know, the funny thing is, I think a lot of people have that in their head, because I did this piece on like there was like the Marvel Universe trading cards that came out in like the late 80s, early 90s.
Uh-huh.
And Art Adams did a bunch of stuff for those. And there's a cartoonist named Ed Piskor who like loved them. and
Yeah.
and there was this one card that he did that had Sauron, that Art Adams did, that had Sauron on it, and it has all these like people from the Savage Land in the background, and it has like details on their face, but they're so tiny. And he told me when Ed told me, he was just like, I just couldn't believe he could draw these tiny faces so well. Like it was a card, and it turns out that
Right.
Art Adams was actually drawing the cards at like full Bristol board size, and so like
Oh,
that's the reason why he could do it. But it's like, why would you know that when you're looking at it?
oh yeah. I mean, you're everything. Shouldn't everything be done that size when you're doing, comic illustrations or any type of printed medium? This just where our heads were, like you said, being young and we're still trying to comprehend how does it all translate? How does it all come together?
Mm-hmm. So early on, did you know that you wanted to draw comics? Because I know you went to school for graphic design and illustration. Was that with like working in comics in mind, or was that just something that came later?
It was honestly, I wanted to do again, animation was kind of the first thing that I noticed, the cartoons as a kid. So that was kind of where my head was. I didn't fully understand, going back to this, I think that's our running theme is just as a child, you just couldn't comprehend certain things. You just thought, okay, it's in this comic or it's in this book form, and that's great. But I get to also see these same characters moving on screen. And that fascinated me just a little more at
Mm-hmm.
that time because not only are those characters that I love, they're also moving pictures. And I wanted to try to pursue some of that. So the the animation aspect was kind of my first instincts. And I think a lot of that is where my art sensibilities, even then, started at that time because I really started to notice what the characters looked like in terms of animation. Anyway, they had a different type of shape
Mm-hmm.
or silhouette, if you will. They weren't all the same size, same height, same muscle structure. Some were bigger, some were shorter, some were wider. That kind of uh, aspect, and it made me really pay attention to that. Again, that was kind of like, you know, at that age of processing things. And that was one of the first things that I was able to kind of grasp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that the animation is very interesting. It's very formative, but I do think it's kind of funny that like a lot of the stuff you're into, at least like Space Ghost and the Hanna-Barbera stuff, um, like a lot of that stuff was like Alex Toth was working on that stuff, and
Yeah. Oh yeah.
he's somebody that has become. I mean, I think he's always been influential ever since he kind of came around, but I kind of feel like I didn't really know how big of an influence he was because I grew up in the 90s, and a lot of the 90s were like, I don't know. I mean, as much as like, not saying there's anything wrong with it, but a lot of it was kind of people loved Jim Lee. People loved like Rob Liefeld. They loved like the energy of the Image guys. And so they were a huge influence for that time. But I feel like it's
Right.
kind of come back around where somebody like Toth is a huge influence. And I feel like, given the fact that you grew up on that stuff is something that you really processed and took in, I kind of feel like that you were kind of on the early wave of that, if you will.
Yeah. And it's funny because even then, going a little further into it, um, not only was the American cartoons something that really fascinated me, I got whim of some of the earlier Japanese animations, like
Ooh.
gosh, the name of G-Force, Battle of the Planets. That was one of the first Robotech,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and of course, Dragon Ball was even around at that time, and that stuff really, again, I'm trying to wrap my little brain around this stuff, and even a little time after really getting into comics and really just kind of honing in and realizing that I wanted to do comics, I still was really fascinated with animation,
Mm-hmm.
and I started to get started to have I guess these revelations about, you know what, there might be a way you can have both.
Right.
Uh, in a printed medium, you can create the same type of energy, the same type of life that you see in animation. Maybe you can put that in comic form or illustration form. And so I started to subconsciously, you know, implement a lot of what I saw in animation in my drawings. So
Mm-hmm.
anime played a big part of that for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting how that works. I mean, we talked about it last time. I really complimented you on your work on Power Man and Iron Fist and like the energy you convey on the page and like how you, I don't know, it's there's something that's really interesting when you look at comic art because there's no motion element to it, but you can convey like the beginning and then the end, and like you can convey the action in between by showing those two, you know, the build up and then the reaction and everything like that. And I think that you do
Right.
that really well. But I don't know, I think it's, you have such an interesting list of influences because it seems like a lot of them aren't like explicitly comics. Like you went to school for graphic design, you have an anime background, you love Norman Rockwell, and one person I wanted to talk to you about was you're a big J.C. Leyendecker guy, right?
Yes, I am. I am. His design sense, it was fascinating.
I think he's really interesting because I feel like you know a lot of magazine illustration from that period and like particularly his work has become a lot more influential in comics these days. And if
Oh
you
yeah.
like, you look at people like Sean, I believe Sean Murphy talks about him as like an influence, but there's a lot of people who talk about how has like a major impact on what they look at. I had John McCrae, who is not somebody you would think of as somebody who would look at J.C. Leyendecker as like an influence, but when he, after Hitman and after some like times where he was in a tough time, when he was having a tough time getting work, he actually kind of was like looking to figure out how he would rebuild his art, and Leyendecker was a huge part of it. And I don't know, I think it's interesting how there's all these different influences that play into it, and quite often it's not even really comics that are generating the influence in the comic artists.
Oh, you know, and honestly, it's kind of an ebb and flow when it comes to influences,
Mm-hmm.
because Leyendecker at one time was pretty much uh, in my reference, in my immediate reference file.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's kind of moving in directions of course, Toth is on the top of that list. I'm going back to a lot of the old strip artists.
Yeah.
Um, you know, of course, you can't go wrong with Milton Caniff, Alex Raymond, Al Williamson. I don't know if you're familiar with this strip series. It was a British strip series, Modesty Blaze.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah. I Jim Holdaway is the illustrator um, for a long time on that strip. I got like 4 volumes of the Modesty Blaze series. As a matter of fact, there's a few collectors of original art for Modesty Blaze here in the local area in Atlanta, and I get with those guys. I guess about twice a year, and we just go through original artwork. I started collecting some of that stuff. Actually, I got 2 pieces right now. Cost me a grip, but that's one of those things where it's like it's all um, academic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you most of the stuff that I'm into now, even then, you didn't realize it, but you did it for academic purposes,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're looking at these bodies of works from individuals, and you're influenced by it, and you study it. And when you're studying that stuff, it's of course naturally going into your work, and then you start to blossom into something that is in the vein of what you're influenced by, but then you start to go beyond that, and
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like, I guess going back to anime, it's almost like Super Saiyan. At first, you're training, right, and then you hit one level, and then you continue to train, and then you hit another level,
Yeah.
and you continuously grow. I have a lot of people tell me even now, the work that I'm doing now, even on our new series, is it has a lot of what me and David did on Power Man and Iron Fist,
Hmm.
but it's different as well. You can see it, or at least I can tell in what I'm doing, and a lot of it is because of that constant um, training or that constant repetition. Um, I tell students all the time the best training or the best uh, thing you can do in order to grow is to be on something that is going to force you to draw everything from every angle a lot.
Hmm.
And that's like working out,
Yeah.
right?
You got to put in the reps.
You got to put in, it's all repetition. It's
Hmm.
all repetition. So, you know, sorry for kind of going on a tangent there, but when you speak about influences, that for me, that definitely is something that I continuously, I'm starting to get into guys that I hated as a kid,
Yeah.
right? You want me to name a few?
If you'd like to, yeah.
Sure. Goes without saying, someone like Jack Kirby, I could not stand his work as a kid, but now I'm enamored with it.
Hmm.
Um, and for nothing more than just the rawness of it. He was
Hmm.
very raw. Is very he gave you no matter what it was, you felt the the impact of it. Um, Not to mention how awesome his designs are. I'm ripping off a few of the creatures
Mm. Yeah,
that
the
he
the
designed.
first Janu
You know,
in Bitterroot kind of feel Kirby-ish.
oh yeah, trust me, there's going to be more of that.
No, I think it's one of the things I think is really interesting is like we kind of look at sometimes you look at an artist and you see like the influences in their work, but then with other people like with you, like I would not have picked out almost any of the influences we've talked about. But I mean, I think that's the interesting thing is like influences aren't like just influences doesn't mean emulation. It means that like you're kind of taking elements that you like from each of them and they're kind of building the foundation of what you do with your own voice, and it's like kind of creating who you are as an artist, but you're still you. You're still going to pick and choose what you like the most. Like before we recorded, we were talking about LeBron, and like LeBron James is like a student of basketball, and he's a guy
Hmm.
who will look and he'll study film of like Larry Bird, and he'll study film of like Dr. J, and he'll like try to figure out what worked for them and what he can employ in his own game. And I think it's no
Hmm.
different with artists. It's like you're just trying to find
Hmm.
what works best for you.
Yeah, I mean it's Frankensteining the whole thing, or even better yet, it's like Voltron. We got to throw the animated cartoon
Yeah, yeah.
reference in, but it's like one specific thing. You use that for that specific for whatever specific purpose that you're doing. Like I'm working on this book. The creature designs are something that I wanted to kind of I wanted to emulate something that wasn't necessarily um, uh, I wanted to do something that was a little throwback, and Jack Kirby was the first person that came to mind. He did it, and he's still the best at doing that. And you want to do because what we're doing now, I just didn't want to. I wanted to feel different than what we did with Power Man and Iron Fist. Obviously, it's a different story,
Hmm.
but at the same time, we wanted it to feel like, we wanted it to be familiar, but we also wanted to show this evolution, if you will.
Yeah.
So yeah, the influences are constantly ever evolving. And there's another guy, Tony Salmons. You ever heard of that artist? He did.
Somebody mentioned him on the podcast before, but I'm not familiar with his
Yeah.
work.
Well, look him up, and honestly, you probably will appreciate his work now. But
Mm-hmm.
as a child, our aesthetics was all about um, everything had to kind of look easy to read, clean. I mean, the art, don't get me wrong, these artists are phenomenal, but I was all over someone like a Joe Sennett or
Mm-hmm.
a Ron Wilson, or because Joe Sennett was the inker, Ron Wilson, or artists in that vein where it was very clean, the inks were nice, and John Romita Sr.
Mm-hmm.
All those artists were brilliant at what they did, but they also were very, there's a very um, easily digestible um, body of work.
Mm-hmm.
So, someone like a Tony Salmons, his stuff was gritty, like a Jorge Zafino,
Oh yeah.
gritty, it's like all these guys, their stuff was honestly scary.
Mm-hmm.
As a kid, it was scary stuff because it was like, it was so intense. Believe it or not, I was freaked out by Michael Golden's work as a kid. He's my greatest influence. There's with all of the names that I mentioned, it, I can't go without mentioning Michael Golden and how he is kind of a combination of all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that raw energy.
He is
It
the
was that,
Voltron.
yeah, he is the Voltron. He's the head. He's Voltron. He'll be the head. It's like he was doing those things, in the early '80s, mid '80s, and as a kid, that stuff was I wasn't ready for it. It was too much,
Mm-hmm.
and man, I go back and I look at stuff that he did back then, the Micronaut stuff, of course. He did an Avengers annual number 10,
Mm-hmm.
which if I can get my hands on some original artwork, if you know anyone, or I'll put it out, I will put it out there right now. Collectors, art dealers, if you have Michael Golden Avengers annual number 10 original art, please,
You're on the
you
market.
can. Yeah, I'm looking, I'm searching for some pieces there. Just don't gouge me today.
You know who scared me when I was a kid? Was Bill Sienkiewicz. Like he terrified
Oh
me.
yeah, oh yeah, that's another one. That's another one. Absolutely.
I couldn't read a single issue of New Mutants. I have them, but I couldn't read like the Demon Bear stuff because it freaked me out so much. And it's like honestly, like I have never went back to read the New Mutant stuff because like it was so intense. But now I see his stuff and I'm just like, this guy's a genius.
He's an absolute genius. He's another one that's way before his time. We were beyond blessed to have him do a variant for us.
For Bitterroot.
Yes, yeah, he did a variant. We just released that cover last week, I think.
Oh, that
I think it was
I missed that. I was gonna bring up the fact that you got Mike Mignola to do a cover, which is about as good as you can ask for a monster book.
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, that's another one. I mean, we got a few luminaries doing some covers for us for sure.
Yo, everybody! I want to take a second to talk about my friends over at Ahoy Comics. They're looking to shake up the publishing industry with a bold new format: comic book magazines. What are those? Comic book magazines will feature traditional, full-length comic stories, plus extra material like prose fiction from Grant Morrison, cartoons from Shannon Wheeler, and more. And Ahoy begins its second wave of comics with 2 titles. First is Captain Ginger, a 4-issue miniseries from Stuart Moore and June Brigman about a future where humanity has died out, but one gang of felines and their leader, Captain Ginger, struggle in a hostile universe after managing to escape the Earth. Also in October is a new 6-issue mature readers anthology miniseries, Edgar Allan Poe's Snifter of Terror, as creators like Mark Russell, Tom Payer, and Fred Harper tell stories that are a cross between drunk history and Tales from the Crypt. Look for those in October in comic shops everywhere. And now, let's get back to the show. Well, let's talk about Bitterroot. Before we get into it, I have to ask, what is the name of the family? How do you pronounce it?
It's Sangria.
Sangria. Okay, so I'm gonna read this solicit really quick. Bitter Root is the book that Sanford is doing with co-writers Chuck Brown and David Walker, both of whom you've worked with before. Colorist Rico Renzi and letterer Clayton Cowles. It's set in the 1920s, and it's at the time of the Harlem Renaissance is in full swing, and only the Sangria family can save New York and the world from the supernatural forces threatening to destroy humanity. But the once great family of monster hunters has been torn apart by tragedies and conflicting moral codes. The Sangria family must heal the wounds of the past and move beyond their differences, or sit back and watch a force of unimaginable evil ravage the human race. I've read the first issue. It's excellent, and I have to say, like, I can see a lot of things that you're doing different than compared to Power Man and Iron Fist, particularly with layouts. It's an interesting book visually, and then like the whole premise is great. I really love the first issue, but I'm curious, like, I know you know both Chuck and David. Like, how did this book originally come together?
Originally, Chuck, he brought up a thought of, and this is during the time me and David were still working on Power Man and Iron Fist, and he had mentioned to me about because there was something that took place within our story that kind of made him think about, has anything ever been done, for the time period of the 1920s, 30s, somewhere around that time period with the Marvel Universe. And there has been some things, but Harlem was a big part of the mythos for Luke Cage, specifically. Danny on some levels, but Luke Cage specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it would be kind of cool to maybe do a flashback of maybe his, Luke Cage's granddad or something. And then I kind of mentioned to him, I think it was on the level of I don't think I actually said anything. I just thought it in my head. Hey, that sounds like a cool idea just to do, period. Not, let alone do it for Luke Cage. But I brought it back up to him and I said, hey, that idea about the whole Harlem Renaissance thing, has there ever been anything done like some kind of story, like a fantasy story? Because there are a few stories out there that they're not fantasy though. They're all kind of like biographies of people of that time, creators, like the writers and the musicians and so on and so forth. And we did some research on that and didn't really find anything. And then it just kind of hit me, you know what? This is a pretty cool time period that we can play around with, because there's so much, that was honestly a magical time. It's no other time in history has it been anything quite like that in this country specifically.
Mm-hmm.
That much of influences from one place, and it still is the rippling effect of that influence is still felt today.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the music and the culture and so on. So long story short, I just decided to do some quick sketches and designs of some characters that that would be kind of cool based on that. And then it hit me that, what, we're going to do something that, if we're going to do something here, it'd be kind of cool to maybe give them some kind of superhero powers. And then I thought, no, that's a little too, on the nose or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then, funny story, I was at Dragon Con and I saw this family, this African American family walking around. They had on steampunk like costumes,
Mm-hmm.
and I was blown away by that. It was so cool. I called them over and I took their pictures, and that visual just stuck with me for days and days. And then I just decided, you know what? I'm just going to draw these guys. I'm going to draw them because they look so cool.
Yeah.
And then I showed it to Chuck, and he was like, what is this? And I was like, I was thinking about that idea about the Harlem Renaissance thing, and I think it'd be kind of cool if, we play around with that, maybe using some characters that look like this.
Mm.
And he said, a funny thing, I was thinking about, like, maybe there's a family that was during that time that hunt monsters or something. And I was like, wait a minute, that sounds like we can really play off of this thing. Making a long story short, I mentioned it to David, and David was like, I was thinking about something similar with the Harlem Renaissance, but maybe not necessarily that. But I was thinking about maybe doing a story, and I said, hey, maybe we can just come together
Mm-hmm.
and put all of our resources together and come up with hopefully one cool idea. And that's more or less what happened. And we just started putting everything in the pot, making this big giant gumbo that hopefully folks can see here shortly and enjoy.
Yeah. That was a total opportunity to go for another Voltron reference, because it did sound like you
Yeah,
guys kind of you guys formed up together, and you
yeah,
formed this like
yeah.
super creative team. But I think it's kind of cool that you're getting to work with David on a creator-owned book, because you guys did Power Man and Iron Fist together. You did some Shaft stuff, and then with Chuck, you did I think basically your only other real creator-owned comic was Rotten Apple, right?
Yeah, but we also worked on I'm going to sound like such a narcissist right now, but we worked on the webtoon series that's out now called 1000,
Mm-hmm.
and webtoons series is it's a 16 chapter series that we're doing right now for that company, and we just won a Ringo Award uh, for best web comic for that series. So,
Awesome.
yeah. Funny story. Tom King, they were at the awards as well, and Tom went to Chuck and said, "Okay, now that you're a winner, you know, we can talk about some new things here." So I guess everybody likes a winner. So I think they knew each other for a while. So I guess he might be doing something sooner or later over at DC. We'll see.
Nice. That's awesome. So I do want to talk about the setting and the time period. I know that research is a big thing for you. You want to make sure you do things right. So when it came to actually making sure that you're bringing the time period back to life, like making sure that these characters look, you know, time periods, reflective of the time period, but still like looking like Monster Hunter type people. What did
Yeah.
you turn to? Was it just a ton of research, just making sure you got this all right?
Yeah, it was a ton of research. Man, a few documentaries. Definitely looking at cosplay, to be honest with you,
Really?
because that's something that cos cosplay done right, the steampunk stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of really strong cosplay when it comes to steampunk. So we did some studying of that. And again, like I said, we did a lot of uh, studying documentaries, and then I think David, he just finished up a Frederick Douglass graphic novel, and of course, all of that history around that time period with him, he was able to pull some of that stuff and bring it into our story, some of the history. We got something that took place in history right before the Harlem Renaissance,
Mm.
and that's kind of the foundation of why the family is split.
Oh.
So we basically use history, and we're kind of turning it and making it a little more fantastical. So we're excited to bring that into what we're doing. We'll be doing that on many levels as far as like tying in history into fantastical.
Yeah. One thing I really like about the premise too is the fact that it's, it is a story about monster hunters and monsters, but the monsters themselves are actually people whose souls have been infected by hate, racism, and oppression. And like that's, I don't know, I think that especially today, in seeing like seeing a fictionalized version of what could happen to people if they let that stuff overwhelm them. I don't know. I mean, I think that's a really nice touch, and it really ties it grounds this idea in a very real way, and I love that.
Oh, thank you. And I will say this: we're, we when we were coming up with the story, um, we the whole monster aspect of it. There's a million stories out there right now, especially unfortunately, they're all at Image right now. It's like every book that is out there is some type of monster tie-in or whatever, and we wanted to stand out. And I think the time period gives us a fresh spin, but also the the aspect that you spoke about, just what these monsters really kind of represent. But there's also um, the philosophy of the family that's going to really be a great aspect to to review as well. And then on top of that, there's a greater threat.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll leave that there.
I don't want to spoil anything from the first issue, but I do also like kind of some of the stuff you guys were doing with gender roles and about how like
Uh,
one of the characters is placed into a position that she doesn't necessarily think that she should be in because she also
yeah.
has other skills. I don't know. I mean, I think there's it's really tough to approach these things in a subtle way that also has an impact. But I think that in the first issue, you guys just totally crush it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I think what David and Chuck came up with, um, I'm just kind of the guy that I keep it in the road, man. They give me the directions, they give me the playbook, and I run the plays.
Yeah.
So, you
Well,
know,
I do want to talk about the look of the book though, because I did mention earlier, like particularly in the layouts, there's some really interesting stuff that you did with the layouts in that book. When it came to developing the look of it, you mentioned this earlier that you looked a lot to the old comic strips like Milton Caniff and Alex Raymond and Al Williamson. But I mean, was that specific for this project, or is that just something that you've kind of recently been into in general?
yeah, I looked definitely study those guys while I was working while I'm working on this project. And like I said earlier, that Modesty Blaze series is really it's influencing a lot of where I'm going with things, particularly in the fashion aspect of what you have there.
So I did want to bring up the layouts that I was bringing up. One thing I read in an interview from you was like you said that, and I quote, "I try to envision the entire composition before I begin putting pencil to paper," which I thought was, I don't know. I mean, I think that a lot of artists do try to envision that, but I think a lot of it comes out in just like the layout phase where they're figuring things out on the page. When
Mhm.
you're trying to figure out how you want to lay out a page, how much time do you kind of sit on it and ponder it before you actually start drawing, or is it kind of happening simultaneously?
More simultaneously, like I think even when I said that, I think even now it might be a little different, how I go about the process of it.
Mm-hmm.
I I I have thumbnails that show me that I will basically will do the thumbnails that will show me the beats, like what panel should be a bigger panel than the next panel, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or should all these panels be the same size, or should these panels have more of a rougher exterior? Like I do that on a small scale on the thumbnail size so that I can kind of see the overall beats.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, if there's something like, without spoiling anything, like that last page,
Right.
when that stuff happens, that those panels needed to those first upper panels needed to have that rougher feel because of what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
right? We wanted to kind of give that the beats a feeling of something really intense and quick moving, happening. And then of course you got the kind of the big reveal at the end there. So But all of that was kind of, put together. Like, honestly, I think I didn't even have that in mind when I did the thumbnail. So it's kind of like you mentioned earlier, it's a little bit of this free form. Sometimes I got exactly what I want from the thumbnail to the finish, whereas some other cases I can be working on something and it just totally goes a different direction by the time I actually go to the actual board.
Hmm. Once you actually start getting into the big stuff, I feel like you might find out some things work and some things don't. But so I want to bring up there's one little sequence in the first issue, and I'm not going to get into specifics, but it's when somebody's fighting a Janu, and you do this really interesting thing on the layouts where it's like it's a full page, but there's like slices coming into it as if like the strikes with a bow staff are actually
Mhm.
making like the layout.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying you've never done anything like that before, but I thought that was a really interesting approach. Do you find yourself, this being a creator-owned project and you kind of cutting loose and maybe trying some new things? Are you trying some new things with this when you're coming to layouts, or was that just the right solution at the time?
Both,
Yeah.
I think, is the right solution, but it's also that freedom to make those solutions,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. Like, not trying to say anything about, when you're doing corporate comics, you got to be a little more conservative with how you lay out things. So I would have probably done that specific thing if it was warranted, um, with something that might have taken place with Luke and Danny, Power Man and Iron Fist. I go by first name basis with those guys, so I just Luke and Danny. But so yeah, it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I thought that was really nice, but I do think, I mean, that there's something to be said about like, I don't think most, like Marvel or DC, for example, I don't think for the most part they're asking people to completely like betray who they are, but to a certain degree, I think
Right.
there's always like the expectation that you fit within the overall whole of what they're doing in terms of visuals
Yeah.
and stuff. So
Oh, absolutely.
I see what you're saying when it comes to like you might feel a little bit more comfortable doing that in something that you own yourself.
Right. Yeah.
This is kind of a more of like an amorphous idea, but like in the beginning of the first couple of pages of Bitterroot #1, it's like taking place in a club where there's music going on. There's a very musical element to it, but
Uh-huh.
this is just an idea I have, but I feel like your art in general has like a musicality to it. And I don't know
Mhm.
even really know what that means, but there's always such an interesting rhythm and energy to your stuff that
Mhm.
I kind of feel like your art is like musical in general, and it kind of seems like it would jive particularly well with the Harlem Renaissance because of that. Like, is that a way you think about art, or is that just like a wild idea?
Well, thank you. It's honestly a wild idea, man.
Yeah.
I have no idea what I'm doing half. No, I mean, in all seriousness, I've gotten that a lot in especially the last 5 years. I think,
Hmm.
honestly, going even back to when I mentioned about how even as a child, I kind of understood or started to understand like motion
Sure.
and how to make still images move. And I think that was kind of like always in me. Now, the technical aspects of things, the foundational, fundamental stuff, I had to continually learn and grow in those things. But then to be able, once I kind of understood how that stuff worked, and then to be able to put in this raw, life, um, in the work, that was very gratifying. And for a series like this, um, that is super important. I mean, maybe not for every series, something like that is warranted. So I really feel probably the most at home I've ever felt doing a series. Obviously, you're doing your own stuff. I would hope that you would feel like you're all you're all there. But yeah, so that's going back to your earlier statement about feeling like you can cut loose. honestly where I feel like I can do that. And it happens to bleed into how I lay the book out, how I storytell some things as well.
Mm-hmm.
And with that page specifically, when I first did it, it was the first page. It's a double page spread of them having a big party in Harlem, and I got a little emotional because it was like, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
This right here is it sums up a lot of things that I can't wait to get into,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully we can continue to give that same narrative for the rest of the series.
Yeah. Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick break to talk about my friends at Radio vs. the Martians. Mike Gillis and Casey Doran host the Radio vs. the Martians podcast, a show that gathers their funniest, smartest friends once a month for a deep dive into science fiction, video games, horror, comics, movies, and everything in between. So far, they've dissected topics like Superman, Steven Spielberg, Akira, George Lucas, zombies, Twin Peaks, Hayao Miyazaki, James Bond, Watchmen, and whether drivers are required to pull over for the Ghostbusters. Find this podcast and its spin-off show, Podcast La Vista, baby, a celebration of the films of thespian and statesman Arnold Schwarzenegger on iTunes, Stitcher, and RadioVersusTheMartians.com. And now, back to the show. Yeah, I do want to ask. I mean, this is a creator-owned project, but at the same time, you've worked with David before. You've worked with Chuck before. You know them both pretty well. Like, does having a comfort level of them as like fellow storytellers on this, does that help you? Like, I don't know. Does familiarity breed better work for you, I guess?
Oh, absolutely. I think, it's kind of like, and I'll just say this right here because this is kind of the thing that is, I don't know if it's necessarily an elephant in the room per se, but it is something that we're kind of championing, I guess that's the word.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing this, we're taking up this banner, and that is, an all black creative team working on for lack of better words, a pretty high profile book at Image. And I wanted to do this with David, and Chuck as well. But I think with David, because we had already done something that was respected in the industry, and it got a lot of accolades and acclaim
Mm-hmm.
with Iron Fist. It was like, well, why would we not do something else? Because and the fact that we're African, all African American creative team,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why not? It's like why because that's just something that is I think it can be an inspiring story
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of creators um, of all walks, really.
Yeah.
So I think that's ultimately why we wanted to make this happen. Not only well, and to also say above all of that, Chuck, his ideas are outstanding, and David is just he's a genius. The
Mm-hmm.
guy's a flat out genius. He should be writing and probably will be writing some huge titles real soon. One just got announced, and so it's that kind of stuff that for me, I just love to be a part of some things that really it doesn't necessarily have to do with me, or all about me. It's about who I'm with.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see them. I want to see them elevated and lifted up. And I figured, if we can do, I'm saying a bunch of things, but to sum that up, it's like, you know, we worked on something at Marvel that was successful. It made a pretty, significant splash.
Mm-hmm.
We should carry that momentum, and then also bring about the narrative that we're doing something that is kind of unprecedented in terms of uh, at Image specifically. Independent comics in a lot of ways. Um, we independent comics in general, for African Americans,
Mm-hmm.
or anyone of color. Um, those those properties, or those opportunities are kind of spread thin to
Mm-hmm.
some degree. Of course, everyone within the last year or two has been screaming about more diversity, more inclusion, that kind of thing. And but from the independent side, there's stuff out there, but it's not getting the profile that it should get.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Partially because of how the infrastructure is set up
Right.
in this industry. So we're trying to, that's a lot of the minutia that we're dealing with from that standpoint. But we figured we got to do something that's at least on a level that's going to get some premier attention,
Mm-hmm.
so that hopefully it can open the door for other creators.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I mean, I
yeah,
think that to a certain degree, it's like what you saw with Black Panther this year. It's just like you're showing that it can be done, and that you can
right.
have a big book at Image. I mean, I went and picked up comics today, and they had Bitter Root, I don't even know what to call them, like little, like just basically sales pieces out at the register that you could pick up and put in your bag as you're leaving. And I thought that was really cool. So it seems like it's a book that's being supported too, which is pretty great.
Yeah, and Eric Stevens, with his support, and just the rest of the Image staff, we really, they've been very, not only supportive, but they've been kind of, what's the word? They're excited. I guess
Yeah.
that's the best way to put it. They were like, please, you know, don't go anywhere else with this idea. We will want it here. And again, they got The Walking Dead and Saga, and all these other really high profile titles. So do they really need this? Not really, but at the same time, they do. Just
Hmm.
being honest, and so that's something that we're very aware of. And you kind of mentioned earlier, just a few minutes ago, about the whole Black Panther uh, phenomenon, with the film, and just what that represented. And that honestly is one of the biggest inspirations for us. I mean, a very, 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 very small way, we hope to kind of do that for the industry here. I mean, we're not going to make $1 billion off of comics, but we do think that we can reach an audience, just like the film did, that really wasn't available, or they weren't catered to,
Hmm.
right? The industry, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying, how the infrastructure is not really set up the best for, just being honest, not for the best for people of color,
Hmm.
you know, or just people in general, the casual fan, it's just not really set up. So we knew that, even more specifically, if we want to reach that audience, of color, we need to start doing some things that kind of go, in the realm that would allow that our property to reach that audience.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's a great book, and I'm hoping people pick it up, because and it's good to hear that Image is supporting it and backing it in a way that might help it reach the destiny it should. But I don't know. I'm looking forward to people reading it, but I only have a few more questions. I wanted to ask about something we were talking about before the show, and I
LeBron James being
yeah.
the greatest of all time. That guy. No.
In a little in a second for that. Actually, I do want to note LeBron is like detonating on Portland right now. I actually got an update on my phone. It's like LeBron's doing this. I'm like, come on, ESPN. I don't need to know everything LeBron's doing.
Oh yeah, they're shutting it down. This football. I think Saturday night they're showing his first home game. They usually show football on Saturday nights, but they're going to cut out a game just to show this
That's amazing.
basketball.
Oh, I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean they don't do that. So
I'm trying to think of what the energy would be like in the Staples Center for that. It's going to be bonkers.
yeah,
Um,
that's gonna be nuts.
But I did want to ask about like one of the things that people don't think about often with comic creators, but also artists in particular, is that like you spend all day and you're always working. And I was kind of like at like a drawing table, and I was reading about your schedule, and this was a few years ago, so it might not be the same. But an interview I'd read with you before, you said you had a tendency of working until like 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. sometimes, and that's with like waking up at 9 a.m. And like
Right.
that can be tough. Like, how do you find a balance in your schedule to make being a comic artist something sustainable and like survivable, basically?
Survival is the optimal word. I think now because I have kids that are a bit older, I can now. It's funny because I started to work out a little bit and eating a lot better. I am trying to be a lot more mindful of my schedule at night. So I still kind of go to bed anywhere between 1, maybe 2 at the latest,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm definitely up by 7:30, 8 o'clock
Mm-hmm.
um, every day for the most part. Um, I just find that that time is it's very invigorating to be up early in the morning, especially if it's a nice morning and you kind of get that full effect of the day. Because even with the schedule that I had previously, the one when I would wake up at like 10 or sometimes 11 or whatever, that's just I never felt like I was getting ahead. It
Mm-hmm.
always felt like it was just like survive the next day and go to the next day. And I never felt like I had the day, if you know what I mean. I just felt like I was trying to survive it. I didn't have it. I
Mm-hmm.
was just trying to get through and trying to, get to the end of the tunnel there. But with this schedule, which is oddly enough, it's a normal schedule. You go to bed at, 1, you get up when everyone else gets up and you go about your day working, you have
Mm-hmm.
your coffee. Honestly, coffee has become I should get an IV that put coffee in it and go. I wasn't a coffee drinker, but I drink. I'm not like a fiend or anything, but I drink a few cups a day, 2 cups at the most, and it gives me that boost, and then kind of working out, eating right. It really has made things a lot more um, fresh for me and not so heavy and compacted, if that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
No, I mean it totally does. I mean, I talk to a lot of artists, and some of them. I mean, it seems like if you have like a schedule you can follow and things that you can turn to that aren't necessarily just drawing, it leads to like a healthier overall like lifestyle, which can lead to positive gains for your art as well. Because it's all in the same family. It's your life, and if your life is better, then it feeds into your art, and I don't know. It's kind of necessary.
Oh, absolutely,
And so is
absolutely.
coffee.
Yeah, coffee is a must. Can't go without that coffee, man. And I do the Folgers. It's instant coffee. Some people kind of frown on it, but it's Folgers, and it's that higher end instant. So it's good. It's a good grain. It's not. It's so funny. I'm talking about coffee now, like
No,
on some
it's
college
funny.
store. Yeah.
I had a house, the person who house sat for my wife and I when we were out, out for a while. And when we came back, we had like this Folger stuff in there. And I was like, what's that? And she's like, I got that because I just didn't want to make my own coffee. And it's actually pretty good. And I had some. It's good.
Mm-hmm.
It
Oh, it's awesome.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I feel like people would give it like they would just burn it because it's instant, but I think it's pretty good.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's absolutely. And then you put. I got this. I don't use sugar. I use honey. I use the raw honey,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a lot of people say, "Oh God, how would that taste?" It's a sweetener. That's all it is. It's not. You put Splenda in coffee. Some people do, and that's horrible.
Yeah, it's
To me,
disgusting.
it's disgusting. But yeah, I do the raw honey and maybe throw a little. It's the low calorie caramel. Uh, what do
Like
you call it?
cream,
The
like half and half.
creamer.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm off to the races, man. I feel like I need to get me a cup right now. Talking to you,
Oh
I'm sitting
no.
here rocking back and forth like some fiend right now.
Now you started talking about it, so you got in your brain. Well, I'm
Yeah.
just going to close with, for listeners that have listened before, we often talk about things that the guest themselves is interested in. So for listeners that don't love sports, you can tune out now. But for the ones who do like sports, we're going to talk about the NBA for a second. I just have to ask.
Yep.
The new season started the week that we're recording this. It's going up on Monday, so it's going to be like 5 days in when it airs. But so,
Cool.
what are you most excited to watch this NBA season? We're both big fans. Is it just purely LeBron on the Lakers?
Yeah, I mean, come on, man. That's the greatest franchise ever in basketball, and arguably the greatest player ever. So, that whether you're a LeBron fan or you're just casual, you're gonna watch. You're gonna watch. My wife is like the farthest away from a sports fan, and she's gonna watch. At least she's gonna check and, oh, what's he doing now? That kind of thing. Like it's some type of Netflix show or something.
Mm-hmm.
So she's gonna check in periodically throughout the season. But yeah, I mean, yeah, LeBron is obviously the no-brainer. If you want to go with a kind of sub story, well, there's a couple of sub stories. I'm interested in seeing um, if the Celtics are real. Like
Yeah.
they're real for the East. They're real, but
Mm.
are they real for like a true contender? Against Golden State, maybe.
They're
Against
so
Golden
loaded. They're so
State.
loaded. I
Yeah. With
mean,
who? Golden State or Boston?
the Celtics. I mean, you look at
Yeah.
their team. I mean, they're adding Hayward, and I mean, effectively adding Hayward and effectively adding Irving or Kyrie back to a
Yeah.
team that made it to the Eastern Conference Finals and took LeBron to 7, I think it was. And like Jason Tatum looks like, I mean, that guy can't even legally drink, and he is a monster. And so I
Yeah, he really he frustrates me because he's good and he went to Duke. So
yeah.
God, man,
Wait. So
can't.
you're South Carolina. You have Duke hate. Do you like UNC or do you not like either of them?
Oh, dude, I'm a Tar Heel man.
Okay.
I'm a
Okay.
Tar Heel guy. Been Tar Heel since a wee little lad. When I saw that guy named Jordan
Oh, I heard he's good.
race the court. Yeah, I think he played there for a little while and he did okay. He did okay. Did all right in the NBA as well, from what
Yeah.
I hear.
I
Yeah.
actually I had an internship training back in college where I spent 2 weeks in Chapel Hill and staying in the UNC campus.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, and it was funny because I was
It's
playing
another
five.
universe,
What's
man.
that?
There's another universe up there, man.
Yeah. The funny thing though is I played 5-on-5 because I love playing basketball, and I was playing 5-on-5 outside one of the dorms. And this was back in 2005 or something. And out came Ray Felton and Marvin Williams and to play 5-on-5, and they just decimated us. Just absolutely decimated us. It was like, superhumans. It was basically if I was playing against Superman. Like they just killed us.
But that was our championship year. That was one of our banner years.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
actually got to go on the court like shortly after I think they won the title then, and it was like it was really cool being able to go on the court and just yeah, I don't know, just so much history there.
Oh, absolutely.
But no, I think the Celtics are real, and I think the East is gonna be a lot better than people think it is because I think Toronto's gonna be real. Sixers, I think the Sixers are good, but like I feel like they need a bench, and they don't really have one.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and then Giannis is going to be amazing. It's going to be interesting to see what they do there. And as a Pacers fan, I do have to say we did beat the Grizzlies by 28 in our first game, and our bench looks amazing. So I don't know. I'm not saying we're going to win the title, but I'm not saying we're not going to win the title.
You know what's interesting?
What's that?
The East, the Celtics is, the cream of the crop, right? And every other team in the East is kind of built like the Celtics, if you really think about it.
Yeah.
Young, a lot of all young teams, a couple of, really promising, stars, maybe soon to be superstars, right? And a few of the teams have, they're kind of deep, or at least they have some guys coming off the bench,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then the West, a lot of the a lot of the teams is sort of kind of built like Golden State. We hadn't even talked about those jokers yet, but you know, yeah, I mean, tons of superstars, you know, championships everywhere. All those teams, a lot of those teams have championship people, players on those teams. You see what I'm saying? So it's kind
Yeah.
of like it's just interesting to see how that all kind of uh, started to formulate, I guess.
I mean, it's wild to think that like you look at like Oklahoma City and they got Paul George and they have Russell Westbrook, and it's crazy to think that you look at that and you're like, wow, they don't have enough stars. And I'm like, wow,
Right.
that's like a former MVP, and then like Paul George, who is like a top 15 player. And I don't know. I mean, it's crazy because you look at like Houston's got Chris Paul and James Harden, and then they also got Carmelo and Clint Capella is really good.
Oh
And
yeah,
and
he's
they
really
got
good.
and they got annihilated by the Pelicans last night. So who even knows what's
Yeah,
going on with them?
yeah, and then even the Pelicans got a great team.
Yeah,
And arguably, I think the greatest player in the NBA that's not LeBron James. Like
Anthony
that
Davis.
I think Anthony Davis is the best player. If LeBron wasn't playing anymore, he'd be the best player. I hear, the argument with Kevin Durant, what have you, but I think there's something that Anthony is like the all around game, the defense, the rebounding, and of course the scoring. He's
Hmm.
unstoppable. That's the thing. It's like
He had 8 assists last night.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like, and then even with that, if he can get to the place which he probably will, he starts to make everyone else around him better in terms of distribution. Yeah,
He's a
he's
nightmare.
unstoppable.
He's so good.
Yeah, yeah. I met him. A couple years back, coming from New York Comic Con. Actually, he
Oh,
wasn't there, but he was at the airport. So that was kind of cool.
that is awesome. I have been going to basketball games for a long time. I met Scottie Pippen once, and I horrifically
Oh,
embarrassed myself in front of him. It was great. But I do have to ask. So you're a UNC fan. Do you have an NBA allegiance, or is it just LeBron?
Yeah, it's just LeBron. And what's really sad about this whole situation?
What's that?
I don't have a favorite team NBA, but I do have a team I hate more than anyone. And guess who that team is?
Golden State Warriors.
Besides them.
Oh God! Please don't tell me the Pacers, because that would be very sad.
No,
Nobody hates the
no,
Pacers.
no. No one hates the Pacers because they haven't done anything to hate. You can't hate them
I
because they
feel like
haven't
the
done
people of
anything. I
Detroit
hate to say
probably
that.
hate them.
Say that again.
I feel like the people of Detroit probably hate them. The whole Malice in the Palace thing, but
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
man,
But
Charlotte.
we just well, hang on. I think you're going too far. You're making it too hard. I just said we just talked about LeBron, and he's playing for who?
Oh,
He's
the
playing
Lakers?
I hate the Lakers, man.
No way.
So
Why?
this is because honestly, because of the Kobe years. The Kobe years. I'm not a huge Kobe guy. I'm not a huge Kobe guy.
Hmm.
And the Lakers were okay. I was a Jordan guy, growing up. So, them beating up on Jordan beating up on the Lakers were cool, but still the Lakers were still relevant
Hmm.
and they were still winning. And then they got Kobe, and then Shaq came over there, and then they got really good, and it just made me not like them at all
Hmm.
because it just felt like it was too. It's like they were kind of Golden State before Golden State to some degree.
Yeah.
Mega powers everywhere, and they they just were winning too much, and then that's the thing that kind of got me sore with those guys. But I guess I got to figure out what I'm going to do here. I got to figure out some things.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you get to that because they're playing right now. But Sanford, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting Bitter Root and a little bit of everything else with me.
It's been awesome, man. Thanks a lot, and hopefully we'll talk again here once a few issues drop. And thanks a lot for the support, man.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with artist Sanford Greene. You can find him on Twitter and Instagram at Sanford Greene and his work in Bitter Root #1 on November 14th. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support the show, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to exclusive written and audio content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find the show on social media by liking the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, following it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Dave Slusher, Kieran Mark Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Greg Lockhart, Kokachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinello, Kent Heidelman, Philip Sevi, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Poletto, Dylan Campbell, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nielsen, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Mike Gillis, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Dan Guarino, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Henning Allers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Brenda Batista, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DeMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.